Hello everyone, and welcome back to COSS, our course on commercial open source software startups and how to spin off one such startup from university. We are now about to start the third of three parts of this course, where we will be looking at how startups work and how to start them at university. Previously, in the first part of this course, we looked at the software industry as a whole. And in the second part, we looked at open source and specifically commercial open source. So when I say startups, I obviously talk about software startups and then commercial open source software startups. We will learn today that a startup is basically an organization in search of a viable business model. That's the definition. And that this search has an expanding scope that goes through the three main stages that we call, following industry terminology, that we call finding, so searching for, and then hopefully finding, problem solution fit, product market fit, and product channel fit. And we will close with a short look at metrics. So this part of the course heavily leans on established industry terminology. There are no academic textbooks, but there are practitioner textbooks, as mentioned in the beginning of this course. And here I use The Lean Startup by Eric Ries and The Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank and Bob Dorf. So, what is a startup? As just mentioned, the definition we use is that a startup is an organization in search of a viable business model. That may sound a little bit sloppy or floppy or something, but it's actually quite serious. Yes, it's an organization, it's a company, it's somehow usually incorporated. But the main challenge that determines its action is that it does not have yet a viable business model and needs to find one if it wants to survive and grow. And that distinguishes it from an existing company with steady revenue, with steady cash flows. A startup does not have that incoming money. Hence, a startup is not a small version of a large company, and you should not treat a startup as such. That is a big challenge. You need to think very differently from what you would do at a large company, for example, if that's where you started out in business. And the inverse is also true. If you succeed, your search succeeds and you grow, then eventually you are a large company and what worked for you as a startup does not apply any longer. So a startup is an organization with a very different state of mind, different practices, and they have to change over time. Commonly when people think or hear startup, they think, they are doing something new. There's some innovation here. And that's true. But there are very different forms of innovation with different associated risk profiles and also different potential competition. You need to think about this before you jump head on into a startup opportunity. When you have your idea, you're still a long way, usually, from an actual product. And you may be hiding, you may be in stealth, as they say. But at the same time, other people are so as well. So if it's half a year or even a year until you might even be able to show something, depending on the complexity or deepness of where you're headed, then by then there might be competitors doing exactly the same thing, and these competitors may come from very different places. We will look at how to cut all these time frames so that you get certainty faster, but it still applies that some innovations make more sense for a startup than other. So looking at this, what does not make sense for you to compete with as a startup is an established organization, company in their established markets. For example, it will be really hard to compete with existing high-end sneaker companies with a new sneaker. You must be doing something really new. The problem is these companies have deep pockets and they are innovating exactly in that space that they really know well. So there's low invention or innovation risk for them, and because they know what they're doing, and they also know how to take it to market. So it's obvious that Nike or Adidas will come up with new sneakers and variations of new sneakers all the time. It's more interesting to go where there is high market risk, meaning there are not established companies necessarily in place, and that's because, well, there's a high risk that you can actually sell something. I'm not sure it's a great example, but for example, I think that designing a mobile phone for older people who may need those bigger buttons and a different user interface, that's something that makes sense for independent entrepreneurs to tackle, because there's high market risk and established companies may not want to go there. The innovation risk is not so high. I think it's not entirely challenging to build such a phone, but you don't know whether the market will buy. On the other hand, there are innovations or inventions that are really hard to do, but it's so obvious how customers would buy if the product was only available that this is actually where a lot of industrial research is going. Industry loves low risk in terms of markets, and they don't mind the innovation or the invention risk as much because they know what the return on investment will be if they succeed. So the obvious example here is the cure for cancer. If you could only find that cure for cancer, or maybe whatever, that drug for hair loss, you know you have a market. It's just not a problem that's easy to solve. Finally, I want to point out that the interesting for us here source of innovation is the university research lab. That's because university research often, not always, goes after high-hanging fruits, meaning the innovation risk is high. But also what comes out of university labs is often, hopefully, quite different from what's there already, so the market risk may also be high. You may not like it if the market risk is high, but it does mean that there may be less competition. So when you think about a startup, think hard about where you're competing. Usually you want to be competing on high market risk because the other side, the low market risk, is where the established companies understand the business and are doing their job, and hence you would be up against them on their own turf. So then look towards universities or interesting ideas independently of universities. The interesting definition of startup as an organization in search of a business model was born out of the observation that it went wrong so often. So what went wrong so often in startup land? Well, the approach that the entrepreneur took. The entrepreneur, he or she, they had this great idea, and that made them believe they knew what the customer wants. They knew exactly the features that the customer wants. And occasionally that might be true, in particular if the entrepreneur is exactly from that target demographics. But if you're designing or developing for a completely different demographics, you're more likely to be wrong than right. And then even if you hit it right in the beginning or you're on track, things change. So you need to have a defined process of iterating and learning and refining and so forth. And if you don't allow for that, but rather you fix up everything to that one date where everything has to be set, and you work towards that without any intermediate feedback loop and no chance to move that launch date if something goes wrong, then you're also much more likely to fail. And finally, what people used to do is, we have this product and we see some uptick, so let's bring in salespeople from large companies because they know how to sell. No, you cannot bring in people from large established companies into a startup in the middle of a search process or growth process. All you need is people the entrepreneur might think to execute your fabulous plan, and that's exactly wrong. That's the road to failure. What you need to do is to set up a process of learning, which will turn into the search process. And of course you need an initial idea, but that initial idea is only your starting point. That's where you start. That's not where you end. Because with that starting point, that obviously needs to be convincing to people to follow you along, you embark on that search process. And that search process takes you outside your building, outside your home, outside your office. This is perhaps the most frequently said thing by anyone who wants to teach you or tell you anything about entrepreneurship. There are no facts inside your building. Get out of the building and talk to people who you consider your customers or potential customers. Pretty much every product management course, every author will say or will try to tell you that. Rightfully so, because it is hard. If you are convinced of your idea, you already know it's true. Why would you even have to test it? And that's, of course, the road to failure. Rather, you do need to test it. You need to gather more facts. You need to channel those facts into steering your process of defining and refining your value proposition for your markets. To do so, we will use, or startups often use, the business model canvas. The role or the purpose of using the canvas is that this is, again, as you're doing in this course, this is canvas, the place where you put down your thoughts about your business model. So it is the vessel that you fill your thoughts in, where you refine your thoughts, where you make them work with each other, where you explain your value proposition and how you reach out to customers and markets and how you generate revenue from it. So the purpose or the role of the business model canvas is to be the output and result of that search as the company embodies it. So this is only an abstract thing. Of course, the company needs to be able to do what it's being stated on the business model canvas, but it's a communication and work artifact, communication device and work artifact that you use to express and communicate your thoughts and hypotheses about your business model. And then this search process has, by most authors, 3 stages. It starts out with searching for and finding so-called problem-solution fit, where you identify one problem of potentially many and find a solution for it. It moves on to, with an expanding scope, product market fit, where your product really, the product and its value proposition drawing on multiple problems that are being solved in combination to create a coherent whole, fit the market, so where your product with its various problem solutions fit the overall market. Onto a product channel fit, where your product not only conceptually fits a particular market, but reaches its target audience, the customers, nicely by way of appropriate channels. So problem-solution fit is really about identifying the initial problem. Product market fit is making it whole, and product channel fit is about really selling it at scale. And within these 3 stages, the idea is that the search process is structured into 2 activities. You go into each stage with your initial idea, some sketch on the business model or already a refined business model on the business model canvas. But then you refine it for the purpose of the stage, and then you test what you just refined or what you believe is true about you or suppose is true about the business model. So the idea is that within each stage of the search process, you generate hypotheses, make clear your assumptions, and then you test those assumptions or hypotheses to see whether they are true. And your learning from testing these hypotheses will either lead you to deepen and refine those hypotheses, or maybe change them, so significantly that you go back a step because you realized you headed up the wrong hill. So within each stage, you build out the business model, and whatever is new and whatever has been refined over previously information has to be tested and validated. So as to this first part of building new hypotheses or building the initial business model, so let's assume we are really at the beginning. How do you start? Well, you usually do have that spark, that initial idea, and you talk to some people and you just put it down as potential ideas. You don't know anything yet, and the key is to know that you don't know what's true. But you try to make sense of something and put it down as a proposed value proposition for a proposed set of customers in the market segment, and so forth. And you put it down on the business model canvas, and then you go figure out whether it's true. So you have that business model building done, which in the beginning is really creativity, and then you test it. And testing means that you look at your statements in your respective components of the business model canvas. You turn them into hypotheses. It says there elderly people are interested in big buttons on mobile phones rather than small ones, or physical keys rather than just typing on a screen. That's a hypothesis. Is that true? To learn that, you need to build an experiment or design an experiment. So first, step 1, you select that hypothesis that seems to be both most likely to be wrong, but also, if it was true, give you the biggest insight. Then you design an experiment for it. How can you test whether it's true that big buttons are the right thing for elderly people? As you have designed the experiment, you actually run it then, meaning you actually test the hypothesis with as much real-world data as you can. And then you analyze that data to derive the insight, which in the narrow sense would be a yes-no answer to your hypothesis, and in a more pragmatic sense gives you a broad array of interesting insights, not just a yes or no on the hypothesis, but additional information to use to iterate on the business model using the business model canvas. And what that means is that you test hypotheses in one time period, and then you move, after you've done that and you change the business model, you move on to the next time period. You can think about it almost as agile development. You have sprints or iterations in which you test these hypotheses, and you evolve the business model canvas as your expression of your business model over time to capture this learning in the form of a refined business model from which you derive new hypotheses to refine your understanding and build out the business model. And it's critical that you properly admit defeat, if you will, if you're just headed the wrong direction. And it's called pivoting. So the purpose of the hypothesis testing is not only to confirm your ideas, that would be nice, but also to prevent you head at the wrong direction by you failing to confirm your hypothesis. So it can happen that you test something and it turns out to be just not true. Old people can, for example, handle mobile phones with touch screens as well as the younger person and do not need physical buttons. Well, that might be the result of some hypothesis test. So if your hypothesis fails, then you have to change direction. If your hypothesis tests to true, you can keep going. So you either, after having run your hypothesis and your experiments to test the hypotheses and analyze them, you have to decide whether to proceed with what you're doing or to change direction. And the kind of established slang industry term is, do you pivot? You pivot meaning you change the direction of your search for your business model. The key is to understand that this is likely to happen at some point of time. And while you might think it's a failure, in the end it's not, because you really learned something important. Of course, if all you ever do is pivot and you never find anything, then you're obviously in the wrong place. But change of direction because of real learning is not a bad thing, rather it's a good thing. So then, what I sketched out as a search process is a good thing to do because it is time efficient. You focus on testing your hypotheses, and once you have the results, you know whether you're on the right track or not. That's so much better than making these assumptions and testing them only half a year later when your product is out there in the market and bombing, not working out. You minimize the time from here's the idea to do we know it will work, and thereby you're time efficient, and you also only invest the minimum amount of capital and labor for it, so it's resource efficient. You're focused on learning, and you will not scale up, or you will not try to scale unless you know that this is the right thing to scale. It's nothing worse than spending a lot of money on something that's just wrong, even though that is what often happens. Which is not to say you don't need experience to do this well. You need a lot of experience to do it well, and if you're a beginner at this, you may not be that effective at it, but it's still better if you try it this way than you make this assumption, you have that vision, you don't validate it, you keep going, and then you hit the wall. So the stages of the search process that I will now look at have been given different names by different people over time. Here's a loose correlation. The industry in general talks about problem-solution fit, followed by product-market fit, followed by product-channel fit. Blank, and then Reese building on blank, call it customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation. It's not identical, but I think it pretty closely maps the problem-solution fit, product-market fit, and product-channel fit, so I will stick to the more common terms of problem-solution fit and product-market fit. It also loosely matches the stages of a startup and the wholeness of the product as Geoffrey Moore defined it, Moore and McKenna defined it, by selling to innovators first, then the early adopters, and then the early majority. So let's take a look at the first stage, searching for and finding problem-solution fit. Customer discovery, that process defined by blank, is exactly about this, the search process that answers you whether your business model, as described in the business model canvas, your hypothesized business model fundamentally works for a specific value proposition and its assumed customers. In the model of blank, it is an iteration within customer discovery, which then, if You think you achieved problem-solution fit, you move on to product-market fit, and possibly return to problem-solution fit search or customer discovery if you're actually not able to achieve product-market fit later. But let's look at the problem-solution fit search. Again, founders often have that product vision, value proposition they see that their customers want to buy. But that's just the idea. And so many other things could go wrong. You might not be able to even produce or realize your idea. The customers might actually not be what you think, and so forth, which is why we have the business model canvas. It reminds you of all these other components that need to fall into place to make your vision, product vision, or value proposition become real. The first step perhaps you should take, and certainly if you're looking for venture capitalist funding, venture capital, you will be reminded by the venture capitalist that you must. The first thing to look at is the market attractive? Venture capitalists will only invest in your startup if the hypothesized value proposition services a market that is of such a size that they see their return on investment, the hoped for return on investment come true. So we are not talking about a one-digit million euro market. That's not of interest, not even 2 digits. These days, a VC expects a multi-million, if not $1 billion or euro market. Hence, you need to look at your market sizes and see whether that's true, whether your value proposition hypothesized value proposition serves a market that has that size. When you look at market sizes, you need to split them into these 3 stages. What's the total market of anyone needing such a product or such a value proposition you're considering? Then you need to look at who of those will we actually be able to reach. That's the addressable market. If you cannot deliver a product to Africa or some African country, then they may be in the total market, but they cannot be addressed by you, maybe because there are import restrictions or what have you. And then finally, within that addressable market that you can possibly sell to, who will you actually be able to reach and service? Because there's going to be competition and what have you. So you have these 3 stages that you usually start out in your calculations with a total market, then you try to assess who can you possibly sell to, and then given competition, what percentage of the addressable market might you actually be able to reach. And if the result of that is sufficiently large, then your business, your startup is potentially worth it and can also acquire venture capital funding. Blank gives us a model of how to think about markets. It's helpful in making market size calculations. They distinguish between markets that are old, existing markets, and new markets, and then a product that is existing already for these old or new markets, or a new product for those old or new markets. And for each of these 4 variants, you have different strategies of how to address them. Different skills you need, different ways of filling in the components in the business model canvas. So for example, the new product in an existing market has the benefit that the market is well understood, but the product is new, so it has to show how it's different from what's there already, and often these are efficiency gains. Your product is faster. A new product for a new market means the market isn't there yet. You may have to create it, which could be a lot of work because you need to evangelize the idea, and that often works for a breakthrough product. It doesn't mean that the breakthrough product that's so brilliant in your mind is obvious to your potential customers. You still have to educate them, which costs time and money. When you're resegmenting an existing market, the market is known, but somehow you are able to structure it in a different way from what was there. And so your product needs to be able to achieve that, needs to show existing customers how to jiggle around, move things around to make room for your particular view of how the market should be broken down. And finally, there's cloning into a new market. That's often the case if you go from one country to the next, or you go from one market to an ancillary market, say from teenagers to a young, or people in their 20s or so. That would be cloning a product into a new market. Here is an example of open source, commercial open source companies and how they are, examples of this structure. Sugar CRM is customer relationship management software for a market that existed. CRM software existed, but the product really was new. Kong HQ, data center operations and management software that simply came about with cloud computing. That was new markets and new products at the time. I'd argue that MongoDB cloned the idea of NoSQL databases into the cloud. So that is a new market cloud, but they cloned an existing idea, the NoSQL databases. And then the way how Gatsby goes about building user interfaces, restructure software architecture, and how to build web applications. So I think that is moving around a bit how products in existing software development for cloud computing already assumed then as existing markets. So we are starting the search for problem solution fit, following the key activities of building out the business model and then validating it. First step is, let's create the business model, let's create hypotheses that we, from the business model canvas where we put down our product vision. So we write down what we think the customers and the market segments are, we write down what we think the value proposition is, and then we turn this into a yes or no question that we can test. And we do this for all the sections in the business model canvas, and then we choose some to test. It varies by the type of products, of course, and how they reach customers, and software where everything's digital. We have our own peculiarities. So here is the business model canvas with generic questions for you to ask yourself as you filled in your business model canvas already. So for example, what's your under customer relationships? What's your customer acquisition strategy? How do you retain customers? How do you grow them? What are you going to do about it? Or market segments. Well, you describe your market segments, the customer wants and needs, and so forth. For the revenue streams, for example, you describe the number of units of your product you sell, at what prices, and what that means for potential revenues. To get to these hypotheses, the open source way, in addition to traditional ways where you are creative, where you do market research, but you as an individual or the individuals in the startup, the open source way means that you listen to your community. You throw out some piece of open source software and you watch how people are using it, if they are using it. And you communicate with them to learn how they feel about it, what they think is missing, what works, what doesn't. So again, open source and commercial open source enhances established business functions by new ways of doing business. Here, working with and listening to the open source community. So now that you have your hypothesis, so for example, you think that elderly people need physical buttons rather than touch screens, you design an experiment. So you want to test that. And early on, when you're looking for problem solution fit, it may just be that you don't need to code much. So Blank has these examples of how you're just teasing people with a website or an advertisement, promising something that doesn't even exist yet. And when someone goes, say, to your website and wants to use it, all they get is a pop-up, if this was real, or do you want to be notified when we launch because we promise you X or Y or Z? And then you'll get the signups. And if you don't get any signups, people don't care. But if you get lots of signups, maybe that's the direction to keep going. So you learn from engaging with potential users what they might be interested in or might not be interested in. At no cost or very little cost, because it's just advertisements, where you didn't even have to code a prototype yet. Conceivably, you really annoy people if you do it in a way that you promise something that isn't there. But then you can do it, of course, anonymously or change names or what have you. Or you're honestly just open and saying we were testing, and so if you really like that, let us know, and then maybe we will make it happen. Maybe you can get really convinced early adopters that way. If someone's particularly interested, gives a lot of feedback, obviously or possibly try to work with them. So you design these experiments to learn what users, potential customers are thinking. Here, even though I just gave an example of a really basic idea, just running an ad and then having a sign-up web page, as soon as you do a bit more, meaning you code something, you code an app, or you code an application, you have to create at some stage what's called the minimum viable product. As soon as you're not just testing small independent hypotheses, but rather you are moving on from, have to do that in a bit, problem solution fit to product market fit, you need to have something called the minimum viable product. The idea here is that a minimum viable product is useful already for the user. It's not just useful for the startup to learn what users are thinking. It already does something for the user that they want, that they need, so that they can keep using that product, possibly even pay for it. This nicely aligns with the innovators and early adopters of the core product in Moore's Crossing the Chasm. So you don't need the perfect product. If the minimum viability is there, the core product that's useful to some, you may already have some paying customers. It's called minimal because it really focuses on the essence of features that make people come. And so you can argue that there are stages in testing, even within just finding problem solution fit, where you really just are testing engagement. Can you get anyone with an advertisement that promises something? You may have a low fidelity application or website that does something and that users can respond to. And then you can build that out to a minimum viable product perhaps. And after that, it's trying to scale up customer acquisition. And again, in open source, you get extra ways of doing that and getting there. Open source lets you design and run these experiments in parallel. You can lead your community, as soon as there is some, you can lead your community to explore options. You give them something or you let them develop their own thing. If you're a startup without an open source strategy, you have to do it all yourself. If you have an engaged community that cares and it's open source, they will for you possibly explore these options, and you can possibly even lay open some of your ideas to see whether people like it. But understand that maybe you don't have the resources to do all of these, and hence they take it into their own hands, exploring for you the answer to so many hypotheses that you just put out. So they might design and implement and run the experiments. You need to be watching and sucking in that feedback and data on how well these things are doing. Quite frankly, at a university, we often do that. For example, when PhD students use master students to explore interesting things. Effectively, each master student can be viewed as running their own experiment in the grand scheme of things of the PhD students or research fellows research project. So that's how you get ideas. So I kind of skipped ahead already using the open source community here. Actually, we just talked about getting ideas. Now you need to run the experiment to collect the needed information. And again, I should have split this in the open source way. For using an open source community, you can run the experiment by using your existing platform to get users. And if you're commercial, you can use some of that to upsell. You can watch how users migrate, what features they might pick up on. Because, say, you have a heartbeat, a functionality in your software, so you can kind of track what people like and what they don't, obviously with opt-in and so forth. This way you can more broadly test your hypotheses. And once you have the data, you actually need to analyze it. So you need to find answers to your hypotheses, determine their validity, meaning is it true, are they wrong, and so forth. This is input then if a whole set of tests fails. You may have been barking up the wrong tree and it's time to pivot. If it's time to pivot, you may have to go back from product market fit to problem solution search or fit and so forth. Here we are still with problem solution fit, which means you fundamentally may have to change your business model. And again, in open source or using an open source community, you can discuss your findings openly, mirror what you find back to community and engage in a discussion. You can, if you do it right, get a lot of interesting feedback from a lot of smart people. So listen to your community and learn from their responses what works and what doesn't. And again, then this means you use that as input to decide on whether you pivot or proceed. So in problem solution fit, we were looking at individual value propositions and how customers and market segments respond to that. Now, this is the first stage of the search process, and once you think you found some value proposition that accurately reflects a customer or a user need or want, you move on to turn this into a more comprehensive product. Have multiple parallel, related but still different value propositions that help you structure the overall market better into market segments and so forth. Here then is the real customer validation, because using some software because it solves a problem doesn't really mean yet that they are buying. Customers buy ultimately something that not only solves individual problems, but something that comprehensively helps them solve their issues. And in this model by Blank, that's the step of customer validation. Is what you have, where someone said this makes sense, maybe even paid for it, just a fluke, or is it repeatable? So in customer validation, you're validating that this market segment and the customers within are real for that value proposition. And they all could possibly buy, rather than just by chance someone who you convinced because you're a good salesperson. So here then, product market fit is not just the individual value proposition that speaks to a particular customer, but really matching the combined set of value propositions as formed into a product, matching that with the market segment. So after problem solution fit or customer discovery, you have tested that your business model does deliver value to customer, and maybe even your initial market sizing efforts suggest that all of this is worth your time and the venture capitalist's money. But you just don't know whether it scales. Your tests are not representative of the market. You may have been lucky. So customer validation now needs to approach this in a more comprehensive way and test the market segment in its entirety. Maybe all the segments, so that you even test your overall market as defined by the product vision. Testing for a scalable and repeatable business model is challenging. Some key metrics are, of course, financial. Is what you will find as customer lifetime value, most notably, consistently larger, significantly larger than your acquisition cost of that customer. It really should say customer lifetime value versus all the costs associated with delivering the product and keeping customers. So not just acquisition, but also retention and growth. But again, acquisition dominates this cost so significantly that usually you just look at customer acquisition cost as a fill-in as a proxy for all costs. Also, can you reliably sell? Is your sales funnel predictable? Do the numbers pan out? Is there a stable inflow of qualified leads that marketing can create? Or will it trail off quickly? If it trails off quickly, you apparently can't reach customers. So you need to have actually a sales funnel where at each stage there is the appropriate number of leads in it. Again, so in the very early stages, there are more than at the end, but these numbers need to be stable. The proportions need to be stable. If you're scaling up, everything just increases by a factor. It doesn't fall off a cliff at some point of time. And so that scalability, but also then repeatability. Can you actually do it? This might be looking more or require you to look more at your own resources and capabilities and activities. If everything was tied to that one board member which made that important introduction, then you were able to get this one big sale, one big deal or account, but you have to repeat it. And if the other customers in the industry are not reachable by you, then you have a problem. It's not repeatable. Like in problem solution fit or in product market fit or customer validation according to Blank, you have a feedback loop of where you are building out the business model and then evaluating it, and it goes through these 4 stages of the evaluation of generating hypotheses, designing the experiment, testing the hypotheses, and deriving the insights. As we already discussed it is similar to problem solution fit, but now applied to the scalability and repeatability aspects of the product market fit situation. Again, open source can help you address scalability and repeatability. It can help you prime, for example, your marketing sales funnel using, for example, word of mouth marketing, social media, conferences you go to. You send your people to practitioner talks. You send them to research conferences sometimes even to reach out to an audience which will help you generate qualified leads. So, for example, that you can actually scale up the marketing and sales funnel and gain more customers that way. And again, you take a step back after you ran a couple of hypotheses to really evaluate more broadly of where you're headed makes sense. And then if it does, you proceed and build out the business model. And if it does not make sense and the hypothesis failed, you may have to pivot and change direction. Finally, in this growth model after problem solution fit and product market fit, there's product channel fit. This really now focuses on, can we sell very stringently and in a focused way using a particular channel into a particular market segment. So now you're optimizing for reaching particular market segments, and then of course the product is customized for that channel and that market segment. Well, the whole point of market segments is that different market segments need different variations of the product. So product channel fit is about finding the fit of your product variant with that particular channel through which you're reaching out and selling to your customers. And this really is already when your startup is in growth mode. So the basic business model has been validated. You achieved product market fit, and now it's optimization for growth. So you are hacking your growth, as they say. And then later on, the actual throughput of deals as you're maturing a bit more. This arguably is outside the scope of what we can cover in this course, because if you have product channel fit, you are most likely already a successful startup, and hence you will have to turn to more literature to learn about that. So then let me quickly look at metrics. Some of them we already know. Some startup metrics are just the same, like for any viable business, because that's how to fundamentally model and understand businesses. So do you understand the customer lifetime value? Do you know their customer lifetime costs, including customer acquisition costs, retention costs, growth costs? What's your average recurring or the annual recurring revenue, the monthly recurring revenue? How does it develop over time? That's all common to all businesses. But then startups in that search process where the clock is ticking, because not only is time running out, it's mostly money running out. You need to look at your cash burn rate. You got that infusion of cash, meaning you got venture capital. Now, given your current burn rate, the salaries you pay out every month, how long can you keep going? So by when do you not only need to either raise new venture capital or break even, you need to predict that out to react accordingly, either raise more venture capital or break even. And you will only raise more venture capital if you achieve progress in your business model, usually. So you have this burn rate, and resulting you have the number of months of cash left before you have to declare bankruptcy and so forth. In the later stages, you may see your cash flows increasing, and you can possibly predict when you break even, implying that you will going to be profitable and don't need outside money any longer. So that's it from me for today. We looked at what a startup is, which is an organization in search of a viable and scalable business model. And we looked at the three stages: problem solution fit, product market fit, and product channel fit. We really only looked at the early two ones, problem solution and product market fit. And finally at startup metrics, and I will add more on this at later stages. So again, thank you very much for your time and attention, and see you next time when I turn to university and how to make this pan out in a university context.